I didn't expect anything when I opened that envelope. A gold-trimmed wedding invitation. Handwritten calligraphy. His name embossed like everything he touches is meant to shine. The handwriting below it? Still familiar. Hope you come. It'll be interesting. I let out a small laugh. Not loud, but enough to know I've made peace with the past. 3 years ago, he cut me out of the very journey I helped build. Now, he wants me on the sidelines, watching him succeed with someone new? He has no idea. I'm not showing up to bow my head, or to compare. I'm showing up to walk in, head held high, like I was never pushed out. And this time, I don't need to be announced. I make people remember. What do you think I did at that wedding? Drop your guess in the comments, and if you've ever been underestimated, follow this page. There's more than one comeback story waiting to be told. My name is Amara Reid, 30 years old, brand strategist. I work behind the scenes, where beauty starts with clarity. When I met Andre, he had a clunky app, a vague dream, and an unshakable smile. I had a whiteboard, a marker, and the ability to turn chaos into a story worth funding. We started in a cramped studio apartment, buried in cold coffee and tight deadlines. No office, no budget, just a belief. If I helped him fly, we'd rise together. I wasn't just the girlfriend. I cleared the path, and I truly believed. He wouldn't forget who drew the map. I remember the day we sketched our first logo. The whiteboard was leaning crooked against the wall, markers smudged, cold coffee on the table. Andre spoke ideas. I asked the right questions. Then I rewrote the entire brand story. Positioning, voice, the reason people would stop and listen. We had nothing but time, trust, and confidence in each other. He pitched with charm, but I built the pitch deck, wrote the script, choreographed the eye contact. When Andre said we, I believed it. When I said we, I meant every step. All beginnings are small, but what we were building back then, it had soul. And I thought if I kept giving my heart, the outcome would be ours to share. I never imagined my name would vanish from the plan I helped create. The startup took off after a big round of funding. One investor posted about it. Andre was called the strategic mind behind the tech comeback. I read that article 3 times. Not once did it mention me. No sentence, no footnote, no we. The cover photo showed Andre in front of a whiteboard, the same whiteboard I bought, in my apartment. Now it was his symbol alone. You'd think I was angry, but, truthfully, I just felt lost, like I was fading from a story I helped write from page 1. I didn't need to be celebrated. I just didn't want to be erased. Because if you've ever laid the foundation, being left out of the credit hurts more than any breakup. No one said it directly, but I heard it clearly. She's smart, but she doesn't fit the brand image. That was from someone on the PR team, first meeting, said with a smile, but the message was cold. A few days later, their stylist sent me a mood board. Straight hair, nude dress, beige heels. Soft glam, makeup in neutral tones. I looked at myself in the mirror. My curls straightened until my scalp ached. They never said, less black. They said, tone it down, soften it, be more polished. I stayed silent, not because I agreed, but because I thought I was helping the man I loved get further. I chose to step back. I chose to shrink. But what I didn't realize was, the more you dim yourself to fit in, the easier it is to disappear completely. The cold didn't come all at once. It started with meetings I was no longer invited to. Decisions made without me. Already signed, he'd say. I used to know his schedule better than mine, but slowly I stopped knowing where he was, or who he met, or what he was chasing. We still lived together, but our common ground was gone. Dinner turned into screens. Our eyes no longer met, just our calendars. One night, after a long Zoom call, he sighed. Didn't even look at me. Just said, "We're growing in different directions." I nodded. No questions. Because I knew. He had already left. Tonight was just the first time he said it out loud. It wasn't a breakup. It was a quiet unraveling. Then came the silence. No texts, no calls. People who once called me the brain behind Andre vanished from my contacts, like I had never existed. I messaged a few. No replies. Some read and ignored. Some blocked me. I was once the connector, the planner, the strategist. Now, no one wanted direction from a name no longer linked to the spotlight. That night, I sat in my dark kitchen. No lights. In front of me, the strategy notebook I once used to chart Andre's path. The ink was still bold, but I felt faded. I didn't cry. There were no tears left. Just a hollow space, like I was slowly slipping out of the world. And the worst part was, I couldn't tell if this was a new beginning or the end of everything. I lost him, lost the network, lost every bit of recognition I once had. But the one thing I didn't lose was my mind. I knew how to build a brand. I knew how to tell a story that made people invest. I knew how to start from zero because I had done it before, and this time I'd do it for me. I started with a handwritten plan. No office, no funding, just an old laptop, a wooden table, and one decision. I would only work with women of color, women like me, overlooked, pushed aside, told to shrink to fit the frame. I didn't need everything at once. I just needed to begin, because sometimes the only thing left is exactly what you need to rise. 2 years later, I sat in a sunlit room, not fancy, not loud, but mine. On my desk, a client list, 12 businesses, 3 investment firms, 2 nonprofits, all led by women of color. In the corner, a red folder, fresh with new paper smell. My first house, in my name. No cosigner, no permission, no magazine ever wrote about me, no cover photo, but there were thank you emails, DMs that read, "You made me believe I could do it too." I didn't need spotlights to know how far I'd come. All I had to do was look around and realize everything I have now came from refusing to give up on myself. The invitation arrived on a Thursday afternoon. Thick envelope, gold trim, my name handwritten. When I saw the sender, Andre, I froze. 3 years, no message, no check-in, and now, a wedding invite. I opened it slowly. Inside, a glossy photo of him and his bride-to-be, smiling like they belonged on a cover. And, at the bottom, in that same handwriting he once used for me, "Hope you come. It'll be interesting to see me now." I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I just sat there, reading those words like he'd opened a stage. He thought I'd stand outside his life like a side character, but this time I didn't come to watch. Why do you think a man would invite his ex to his wedding? Drop your theory below, because this story is far from over. I told Loretta about the invitation. She sat still for a long moment, then shook her head. "Amara," she said, voice low but firm, "you don't need to be seen. You need to choose why you're seen." I stayed silent, not because I didn't understand, but because her words hit somewhere I hadn't dared to reach. I said, "I'm not going to cause a scene. I just want to show I'm not the same girl he left." Loretta pressed her lips together. She's seen me break and seen me rebuild. Sometimes the person who made us shrink is the same one we most want to outshine. But you have to ask yourself, are you reacting or are you leading? I didn't answer, but that night I started writing down every reason I could go, and the one reason I should. I nearly folded the invitation and stuffed it in a drawer, tried to forget it, but then I remembered my very first investor conference. I prepped for 3 weeks, flawless slides, sharp data, a strategy sharp enough to cut glass. The moderator skimmed my pitch, then looked at me. His gaze lingered, not on the numbers, but on something that had nothing to do with my work. Then he said, almost gently, "Your idea is excellent, but we're looking for something that looks a little more professional." I smiled, thanked him, walked out, but I knew exactly what he meant. More professional meant less like me. That day, I made a promise. One day, I'll walk into a room they think I don't belong in, and make them stare. Maybe this wedding is the first of those rooms. I looked at myself in the mirror, not to adjust, to affirm. I wouldn't shrink myself anymore, not to please, not to fit. No more shrinking. I wrote those words on a sticky note, pressed it to the mirror. Each morning, I saw myself a little more clearly. I chose a dress by a black designer in Atlanta. Soft fabric, sculpted fit, deep sapphire. Not to stand out, but to feel like me. My curls stayed natural, untamed. No straightening, no smoothing. I didn't need to look polished. I needed to look true. I wasn't going to that wedding to remind anyone of who I was. I was going to remind myself I never disappeared. I was just returning, at my full size. I stepped out of the car into the soft afternoon light. No fanfare, no announcement. But as I entered the wedding grounds, the air seemed to shift. Heads turned. Some whispered my name, others just stared. I walked steady, head high, not to flaunt, but to remind myself I belong wherever I walk in. Andre stood by the altar. He caught sight of me through the crowd. His face flickered, brows furrowed, mouth drawn tight, like he wasn't sure if I was real, and Sasha, his bride, smiled, softly, almost knowingly. I didn't do anything dramatic. I just walked in as myself, and that alone made the whole room shift. I hadn't even found a seat before a voice spoke behind me. "So, you're the Amara everyone's whispering about." I turned. It was Patricia Lang, one of the industry's top investors. She'd once dismissed me when I stood behind Andre. Today, she stepped forward, offered her hand. Not out of politeness, but out of respect. We spoke about niche markets, about consulting models for women of color-led startups. She asked for numbers. I gave them. Clear, direct. No need to impress, no need to prove. I didn't bring up the past. I let the present speak. Others began to gather, listening, and I felt the shift in their eyes. No longer Andre's ex. Now, Amara Reid, builder of something all her own. Andre made his way over when he saw the crowd around me. His face tried to stay composed, but his eyes gave away his surprise. He smiled, turned to those standing with me. "This is Amara, an old friend from the early days." I smiled gently, tilted my head. Not quite. I was the foundation. No bitterness, just truth. Clear and simple, like the strategies I once wrote for him. The air stilled. Someone nodded. Another smiled like something finally made sense. Andre hesitated, then laughed awkwardly and changed the subject. But I knew. That line cracked the role he tried to cast me in, because this time I wasn't standing behind his words. I defined myself out loud. As I spoke with a group of young founders, a gentle hand touched my elbow. I turned. An older woman stood there. Silver hair, soft gray suit, no long introduction, just eyes filled with something fierce and kind. "We saw your work." Her voice was low, slow, like she was peeling back time. "While others took credit, we knew who built the ground they stood on." I stood still. That sentence, quiet as it was, rang loud in my heart. Not everyone needs to know, but someone saw, and they remembered. She squeezed my hand, then walked away. As if she'd just returned something old, but never forgotten. It wasn't praise, it was recognition. And it meant more than any magazine cover ever could. As the night wound down, Sasha approached. Glass of white wine in hand, her gaze softer than it had been at the altar. She stood before me. Younger than me, but her eyes searching for something deeper. "You're the one who built all of this, aren't you?" There was no accusation in her voice, just a quiet need for truth. I met her eyes, didn't flinch. "I built myself first. That's how I was able to build anything else." She paused, like she'd never heard an answer so simple and whole. I didn't come to take anything back from Andre. I didn't need to. What I brought was a mirror. And sometimes a single sentence can shift the direction of someone's life. In that moment, I finally understood what it meant to own my story. Sasha looked down at her glass, swirled the stem gently, like avoiding my eyes. Her voice dropped, almost a confession. In the middle of her perfect wedding, "I don't even know what I want to build." Not everyone dares to admit the blank space in their life, but when they do, it means they're ready to fill it with something real. I opened my wallet, pulled out a small folded card, not a business card, just a plain slip of paper. Inside, in my handwriting, "We don't need to start with a clear dream, we just need to start with the right question." I handed it to her. "Then let's start here." She took it. Her fingers trembled slightly, but there was something steady in her eyes for the first time. I handed her a card, but really, I handed her a possibility. I looked at Sasha, and I saw more than just confusion. I saw a quiet exhaustion, the kind that comes from living a script someone else wrote for too long. I exhaled, then reached into my purse for something that had always been there, an old letter, worn edges, yellowed corners. I'd never shown it to anyone, but maybe today was the day. He wrote this before the world clapped for him, before anyone called him a genius. I placed the letter in her hand. "Read it alone, take your time, and then ask yourself, who do you want to become?" She held the letter tightly, didn't ask questions, but in her eyes was a feeling I knew all too well. When a new story is about to begin, and this time it'll be hers. Sasha held the letter with both hands, as if afraid it might break apart in her palms. Her eyes met mine, no longer curious but deeply shaken. "Why did you give this to me?" Her voice was hoarse, almost cracked. I looked at her. Steady, nothing hidden. "Because I never want another woman to be erased from the story, the way I was. Not blame, not revenge, just truth, and a way to forgive." I didn't need Sasha to thank me. I just wanted her to know there's another path, one where women aren't the backdrop for someone else's success. She nodded, eyes wet. For the first time, she wasn't the perfect bride. She was a woman. Awake. Andre walked up just as Sasha stepped away. His eyes, still the same, half smile, half calculating. "You always knew how to make things dramatic," he said, voice laced with that old familiar mockery. I turned, didn't raise my voice, just said one line. And the air shifted. "No, I just finally stopped living small." He paused. Smile faltered. Something flickered in his eyes, maybe surprise. Not because it was loud, but because for once it didn't come from pain. It came from power. In that room, I was no longer his shadow. I was the one who had stepped out, and made him watch. Before I could step away, a small group approached. A young founder asked about sustainable brand strategy. A female investor asked to set a meeting for next week. The third just said softly, "I've heard so much about you, now I get it." I nodded, slipped a business card from my wallet. Smooth hands, not to impress, but to connect. Soon, the table in front of me was covered with colorful cards. A waiter had to bring over a tray so I could hold them all. The lights above the ballroom caught the crystal glasses, casting a soft glow across my shoulder. Not the spotlight meant for the bride, but a light you create yourself by walking your own path. I was no longer someone's ex. I was Amara Reid, the black woman who redefined success on her own terms. Sasha and I stood face to face one last time before I left the venue. No roles, no masks, just two women, one who had just stepped out of the frame and one who was once forced outside it. She gently squeezed my hand and whispered, "Thank you. For the first time, I can see everything clearly." I didn't respond, just nodded as if peeling back a mask and letting her remove it herself. I didn't give her answers. I gave her permission to ask new questions. From a distance, Andre stood still, watching the two women he once chose. One walking in freedom, the other just beginning to define hers. And in that moment, I knew. I hadn't just reclaimed my voice. I had handed someone else the mirror. We stood near the exit, golden light warming both our shoulders. No more music, no more laughter, just silence. The kind that forms when two women share something unnamed. I looked at Sasha one last time and said, "You don't need revenge. Just remember who you are." She nodded. This time, no hesitation. No need to ask again. No need to be certain. Just a quiet embrace. Enough to share understanding, but not enough to hold on. No tears, no dramatics. Just two women, once trapped in someone else's story, now choosing their own place in it. As we stepped back, I saw it in her posture. Not in her eyes, but in how she stood. No more reaching, no more shrinking. She had finally come home, to herself. I walked slowly through the fading reception. Laughter drifted off. The soft hum of background music dissolved into the air. Each step I took made space. Not because people moved, but because every gaze was on me. No one called my name. No spotlight followed, but the light, reflected off glass, filtered through the last streaks of sunset, stretched behind me like a quiet halo. I wasn't in sequins, I wasn't in heels, but I was the center. Not because I was invited, because I arrived, fully myself. Among the ones who once saw me as a shadow, I passed through, a real star, not lit from outside, but glowing from within. I stepped through the doors, leaving behind clinking glasses, hollow smiles, and lingering regret. The night breeze touched my face. Jasmine drifted in from the garden. I didn't look back. Voice over. Amara. You don't need to chase the spotlight. You just need to shine, and let others find their way to you. True light doesn't scream. It stands, steady enough not to be hidden, warm enough to draw people near. I used to think I had to win, to prove, to outdo. Now I know. Real worth doesn't argue, it simply stands. Clear, true, and unapologetic. And if you've ever been cut out of someone else's stage, remember, the light isn't just for the chosen, it's for the brave, who step out and write their own part. 3 months later, a quiet cafe in Brooklyn. No flash, no gown, just Amara and Sasha. 2 lattes, 1 laptop open with a funding plan. I think the fund should focus on first-time founders, the ones without a safety net. Sasha nodded, jotting notes in her journal. She wasn't the lost bride anymore. She was a woman. Learning how to build something of her own. I want to call it the First Light Fund, for those who've never been seen. Amara smiled. Nothing needed to be said. On the table between them, the first startup file ready to receive support. Outside, morning light painted the sidewalk. No more old wounds, just a new journey. 2 women who stepped out of the role and chose to become the writers. The old letter, yellowed at the edges, pressed flat and framed in wood. It sat on Sasha's desk, not to honor Andre, but to remind her that truth often appears after the lights go out. Cut to a different scene. A small workshop. A dozen young black girls seated in a circle, listening. At the center stood Sasha, no longer a bride, now a guide. "You don't have to wait for someone to hand you an opportunity," she said. Writing on the board, "Your voice is your value." Behind her, the letter was printed on a poster. Below it, Amara's words, "Build yourself first." The room was small, lit by sun through the window, and this new generation wasn't following someone else's map. They were laying their own bricks, one truth at a time. Has anyone ever made you feel like just a chapter in their past? Like you never mattered in the first place? I've lived through that, and one day, I looked up and realized, no one gets to tell my story but me. Comment if you've ever reclaimed your voice, not for revenge, but to remind yourself. You were never small. They just tried to make you believe you were. Follow this channel for more stories. Not fairy tales, but real lives, of black women who know who they are and know how to own every page of their lives.